Janessa, I want to start with you. You're a member of Vet Voice, and one of the core aspects of your group is protecting the Constitution. And I'm wondering if you talk so we have some context here. After January 6th, what is the specific threat from within the military that your group is worried about?
The threat that we're most concerned about is rising extremism in our country. And the military is a microcosm of our society at large. And we've seen that there are increasingly more and more extreme elements in our society willing to sacrifice the Constitution and our democracy for power. And so when we saw this rising threat, both across our society and in the military, we wanted to do something about it. Doing this exercise was a way of examining some of the weaknesses and vulnerabilities in our system, and also sparking a larger conversation in America about the very real threat that extremism is.
Let's just take a step back. What is the exercise? What is this 6-hour war game that you staged?
Sure. Well, in the military, it's very common to do war games to try to game out what might happen in a particular scenario, whether that's a deployment overseas or a training exercise. And it's very standard for us to do that. It's a way of testing our strengths and weaknesses. What we did here was brought together over 35 members of the last 5 presidential administrations, all very senior folks who have held positions or proximal positions to this in the past, to actually role play an unscripted exercise centered around what happens if there is another contested presidential election, but this time members of the military take part in trying to overthrow the results.
As Janessa alluded to, the people that take part in this war game are heavy hitters. These are people that know these jobs. Here on this panel, we have a former governor of Montana who got to play our president, and a former senator who plays, I would say, his closest advisor in this. I wonder if you guys could talk about this 6 hours and play acting this exercise.
I defer to the president. Always.
No, look, we walked into that room, and when the lights came on, nobody was paying attention to the cameras. Like, this was the great thing about the people that were involved, that had played so many significant roles, is that this was an exercise where we weren't pretending to be anybody other than who we were, but dealt with a real challenging situation put in front of us. And during that thing, no one would know if you were a Democrat or a Republican. What they knew is that you cared deeply about this country. This wasn't looking backwards. Like, as we sit here today, 1/4 of Americans think that the FBI was actually behind the January 6, 2020 riot. As we sit here today, 1/3 of the members of Congress, representing 37 states, 171 of them, are still denying the last election. As we sit here today, the 3rd highest ranking member of the House of Representatives on the Republican side says actually that they're January 6th hostages, and isn't willing to commit that the next election will be free and fair until she figures out what the outcome is. So it was a great exercise. It was a challenging exercise, I think, for all of us. And I think we're all there with not concerned about just what happened in the past, but what could happen in the future.
There's an element here, and I don't know, this is my experience watching the film version of these 6 hours, where this is an exercise. And it just gets incredibly real. The game designers and Janessa, what they've designed here is scary as heck, and it gets very intense, and the decisions are incredible. I'm wondering, how did the arc of this 6 hours go for you being involved in this? Because I have to imagine, did it start feeling like becoming very real and very scary in the course of it?
You know, I thought it was pretty real and scary from the very beginning, because we knew that what has been happening in the United States is this attempt to rewrite history, to erase the facts of January 6th. And every day you've got to remind people that that actually happened, that this was an attempt at overthrowing the peaceful transfer of power, and that we can't, if we forget or we minimize that, we will repeat it. And so for me, this was an attempt to elevate and raise denial as our biggest opponent. And so when I came into the exercise, I knew my role pretty well. I'd been a staff person for a politician. I knew Steve very well because we share a border, plus we were attorneys general together. And so we have a lot of similarities. So it was fairly natural to come into that space and then think about what was happening. And I think for me, my immediate reaction was all of the anger that I experienced on January 6th, watching this unfold in real time, was like present right at the moment that this exercise began. And so you can see probably I'm a little hot, a little angry, thinking all of the mistakes that were made, like not arresting people on the spot, and not understanding what the situation was in the perimeter. You know, all of that kind of came back in a very real way. And I think, thinking about how you would represent not only democracy in that moment, but also be a valuable advisor to one of your best friends and the leader of the free world. We were pretty much on from the very beginning.
The fact that you would do this exercise and these people take part in it, it seems like an important thing. Warren, you're a legend in television. Part of me is like, what are you doing here with this documentary? What helped me understand how this became a documentary movie? Because I think that's a large part of your role here.
I'll start by simply saying I love democracy and I love America. And John Steinberg, who is my producing partner on The Old Man, said he just talked to his buddy who he grew up with, who is at Vet Voices, and they are thinking of doing a war game, and they were wondering about maybe getting some publicity. Maybe it was something that 60 Minutes should cover. And we quickly said, oh, it's far bigger than that. Not to take anything away from 60 Minutes, but this felt like it's a story that needed to be told and illuminated to as many people as possible. So I didn't hesitate and I jumped in. Early on, when we started looking at how the war game would happen and when, it was initially planned for October. And I said, well, what about January 6th, as close to the Capitol as we can possibly be? And so we were in the Marriott Hotel, steps from the Capitol, where all the insurrectionists stayed. And so it was fascinating to engage with the workers there at the hotel. But I knew that everyone who walked in would be carrying that feeling of January 6th, and that would infuse and heat up Heidi. Like, that's our goal, right? And so we felt there was a story that needed to be told, and I was really pleased that I had an opportunity to be a part of it.
Jesse and Tony, you're both very talented filmmakers, but one thing we all know with nonfiction, one of the big things is access. I can't even imagine being in your guys' shoes, getting this phone call, being like, so we're going to do this, and we need documentary filmmakers to do it. It seems like a dream. Even the sets and the stages, it's incredible. Should you talk a little bit about coming on?
When Warren Littlefield calls, you sit up. Obviously, I have tremendous respect for his work and integrity, and finding creative ways to confront political issues in our society, Handmaid's Tale. That's what I'm looking for as a storyteller. And what I saw here, I'm thinking about what happened on January 6, 2021, and what's our political future? And are we going to descend into civil war and conflict or heal this country? And when I learned that Janessa and her organization and these incredible role players with political experience at the highest levels of government were taking part, bipartisan, 5 presidential administrations, I thought, I want to try to tell this story. I don't know how to do it, but formally, it seemed really exciting. You know, it's live theater, it's improvised role play, it's political thriller, it's dystopian science fiction, which is a genre that Warren knows well. And I thought, I need help. I need to work with my partner, Tony Gerber, and we'll figure it out. And the fact that we could build a world with Janessa's approval that would help bring verisimilitude to this exercise gave us a chance to take inspiration from Stanley Kubrick and other films that have, I think, are sort of the reference points for our movie, for in particular Dr. Strangelove.
Yeah, I'll add that we had no idea what was going to happen, right? We didn't know if this was going to be a film. I mean, we knew we were tasked with making a film. We didn't know it was going to be a good film, right? And for us as doc makers, leaning into the unknown and leaning into that fear is what drives us, right? And so at the end of the day, our responsibility was to create cinema, to create a bundle, a cinematic bundle, a beautiful cinematic bundle that engaged an audience, right? Not just with ideas, right, but through the heart. So this is a film that's really intended to spark dialogue, right, to reach people on the bubble, right, and to remind folks of what it is we could lose, right, if we don't collectively stand up and throw down for democracy, for our institutions, right? So to me, this is the social justice issue of our age, because everything from climate change to the border, you name it, these are extraordinary times, right? And it all comes down to leadership. It all comes down to leadership.
I think you're going to have a wonderful response here at Sundance. I think this community is going to see it, and that's fantastic. I know the intended audience, though, is a wake-up call to the leaders, and this idea that, we need to be prepared for this. I'm wondering, in that sense, in terms of this exercise and maybe this film, what's the next step in terms of how to use the war game and the film as a tool, and if you've started to get a response that there might be a wake-up call within Washington on this issue?
Absolutely. Well, our dream, obviously, is that this gets as wide a distribution as possible. Tony has said this before, but the response of the audience watching the film in the room together as a collective experience is really powerful. And so we hope that there is a theatrical release. Beyond that, we want to take this to universities around the country to engage in dialogue with elected officials, folks who are currently serving in states. As you see in the film, that the crisis expands far beyond Washington, and we think that that is something that could realistically happen, or could. And so we want to ensure that this conversation isn't just happening in Washington, but it's happening in living rooms around the country when families have different political beliefs or different ideologies, that they are taking the step to cross those bridges and have a conversation about what's at stake.
Well, I said this before, it scared the shit out of me. So I'm sure anybody that finally sees it in the theater is going to hopefully have the same experience. But so congratulations on the project. And I think it's a remarkable thing that this exercise is turned into a piece of cinema. It's really
add
wonderful.
one thing?
Please, Tony.
The idea that there's hope in the movie. It's not just a nightmare, a hopeless nightmare, right? I do think that the film is inspiring. And I think that ultimately it is about leadership. And I think what you see in the room is reasoned thought, and I think that I think folks will walk out of this feeling reinvigorated and ready to participate in democracy and hopeful. So it's not just a shit show.
The potential was that it gives the audience a ringside seat in the White House Situation Room as the president makes decisions of the gravest national significance. And that's what we captured, I think. And it is inspiring to see great leadership.
And hopefully, I guess I'd say that with the audience, it's not just that they have the shit scared out of them. They say there's something more important here than who wins and who loses an election. And the test is really how we can respond also the day after. And at the end of the day, don't be scared, be motivated. Mm-hmm. Be motivated to say, we've made it 250 years so far, and we can still continue along the path we have.